Good evening, everyone. My name is Candia Mosley Gandhi, President of the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our fall meeting. I have the great pleasure of introducing the Berkeley City Auditor, Jenny Wong, who's going to give us an overview of her office, what we can expect in the year ahead, and answer some of our questions at the end. Auditor Wong, can I turn it over to you?
Great, thank you so much. And thank you again for inviting me to join you tonight. I'm really excited to spend a little bit of time with you all. And I want to make this pretty informal. And, you know, along the way, feel free to pipe in with questions. I may be focused on moving the slides. And so if I'm not seeing your comments, please feel free to just pipe in. But I'm really excited today, and thank you again for having me. So I'm going to share my slides. All right. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. And I apologize, okay. So today I'm gonna just walk through background, and then I'm going to walk through what is an auditor, what do we do? I'll go through a couple of examples of audits, and then I will talk about some of the things that hopefully you can do to engage with government. So a little bit about my background. I'm an immigrant from Taiwan, came to the United States when I was 6 years old. I grew up accessing government services. My family was working class. I was on the free and reduced lunch program. Was obviously had a wonderful experience in public schools. Teachers really helped me since my parents didn't speak very good English. And then I was a first generation college graduate. So I say all of this because this background, my personal background, really helped inform some of the ways that I approach my work as an adult in government, and as the city auditor. I really try to approach a lot of my work with this background in mind, in understanding the recipients of the variety of different government services, since I was a recipient of many government services. So this is my professional background. I was really fortunate to be able to go to, I argue, the best public university in the country, although I now have a son that attends UCLA. His twin brother goes to Cal. And so there's a lot of arguments in my family about which public university is actually the best. And I was then able to go to New York City and attended NYU, got a master's in public administration there. I also worked in local government in mental health services in San Francisco as a data manager for a couple of years. And then I also worked in New York City's health department working on their budget. So my background is working 18 years in at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. These are federal government auditors. These are congressional watchdogs, we take requests from a variety of congressional members and mostly from different committees. So I did a lot of work for the Senate Finance Committee. And you can see here, I did some work looking at terrorist financing, where we really evaluated, this was right after 9/11, evaluated how terrorists use and store a lot of their assets, and how the government should use that information in a lot of their work at the national security level. Also, looked at a lot of IRS type of engagements. We looked at, for example, my first study looked at the fact that most corporations didn't pay any taxes. And this was in the late 90s, and there's been updated reports that say basically the same thing. But it's where I learned auditing. And the GAO actually is the, the organization that puts out government auditing standards. So when you go to any audits at the federal, state, or local level, you'll see that they'll say that, this particular audit was done according to government auditing standards. And I say that, and I really want to focus on that because we follow these standards, which means our work has to be double, triple checked, and, it's reliable work. I think I have some questions, so I'm going to just look at the chat real quick. And it says here, public. And so maybe Normal, you can explain this question, because I don't really understand it.
You're saying that a UC is public, right? Is that what you're saying? I don't know enough. I'm asking a question here too. And I have the impression that it costs a huge amount of money.
Yes, so it is a public university, but it still costs money. It doesn't cost as much as a private university.
Yeah, that's not good enough to be public, because it's just, well, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to go on about that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. I just want it out there, public, anyway.
Yeah, no, I definitely know. I'm paying that tuition for
Sure.
2 kids.
Sure.
Okay, so this is, so then I switched over from working 18 years as a federal government auditor. And actually, when I was a federal government auditor, I also conducted and coordinated trainings for thousands of federal, state, and local government auditors. And that's actually how I got to learn about the Berkeley City Auditor's Office. Amory, our former auditor, recruited me to run for office. And so I ran in 2018. I won, and very fortunate to get a lot of support from across the community. I was reelected. Actually, it's not certified until I believe tomorrow, or I'm getting sworn in on Friday. So very excited to do this work again for the next 4 years. So what is an auditor? So I like to have this definition, because this definition has 4 definitions, but the one that I'm bolding is the one who hears or listens, especially one who is a member of an audience. And I say that because I really think of my job as somebody who needs to listen well to the community, who's the audience. An auditor can't do their job well if they just shut themselves off into a room with all of the financial statements and budget information. I think an auditor is most effective when you engage with the community, when you talk with the people who are impacted by the policies that you're evaluating. So with my audits, we go through, for example, listening to or thinking about a topic and how it impacts the users of that government service. And we look at all of the different users, from city council members to a member of the public to a specific user. This is, I'm going to just see if I can this. This is the charter, mission, and purpose of our office. You know, our charter authority is wonderful. It means that we can access any information for a particular audit. This allows us to conduct business effectively. It obviously sometimes we have not gotten the information we needed because there's been staff vacancies, and so sometimes there's a delay, but by charter we can ask for any information we need to conduct an audit. So we can go directly to the data source and evaluate that information. We can pull records for a particular audit, whether it's on police, fire, you know, the public works fleet program. And then our mission is to promote transparency and accountability in Berkeley government. And our purpose, as most of you may be familiar, we conduct evaluations of the various programs and services in city government. And we look at this through the lenses of efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. And I'm going to stop sharing for a bit because I think I see some information in the chat. Is there, did you want to ask your question, Norma? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Anyway, greetings, everybody. A number of people in the group know I am a deep communist. I am third generation communist. I run for school board in order to be able to put that conversation out there for discussion and for analysis of where we are in the world. And so this is just a question in line with that kind of objective. I ask you if you, because government is so removed from the people's use, it's there to effectuate this established structure, which is not in our benefit, except slightly here and there. And I'm sure you could point to many things where it's our benefit to have you doing the work you're doing and have an auditor do that kind of thing. But the total effect of what we get governance for is to carry the profiteers forward. All the work we do ends up being to the benefit of the profiteers. I just looked at this. There's a thing on TV that is talking about the path to sustainability or something. And everything they were talking about, it's a very popular, the path to, what's the word for that? Anyway, everything they talked about was how to protect the owner's profits. So you can't make this modification or that modification without taking care to make sure that the owner is making profit. And they're making profit off of poisonous things in the world, and you know that. So I wonder if you've had in mind that your work has any way of looking at what's going on and saying, well, this kind of thing, you know, just even to talk to the community and say, this kind of needs, I mean, we got the League of Women Voters to talk to. This thing needs to be worked on so that it doesn't work this way, or that thing needs to be worked on so it doesn't. This, in spite of the fact that I have to, have to take care that it works according to legal procedures and so forth, needs not to be going on because it is not to the benefit of the people for it to go on. That I'm pretty sure I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Norma. You know, the way we conduct our work is to look at a particular program, look at a particular service. We try to understand, if we're looking at a ballot measure, for example, we try to look at the language of the measure to see what the law says. We also go to the city council item and look to see what the resolution says. We look at what's written. We try to get to the intent of that item. And then we evaluate the program associated with that to see if it was in accordance with the intent of that item. The way that traditional auditing, I've been in this profession for over 22 years, is to, there's a lot of compliance audits where you're just looking at ticking off the box. Did this information, or, they were supposed to expend this amount of money to do this program. Did they do that? Yes. So there's a lot of those kinds of compliance audits. But the performance audits, which is, looking at it from a more, is it performing in the way that it's supposed to perform? I think gets a little bit more at your question. I want to say a year or two ago, the auditing standards added a equity lens in how this, you're supposed to also look at the equity standards associated with a particular program. And that was actually something that I advocated to the national auditing standards to incorporate that. And so now that is part of the auditing standards, is looking at the equity component of programs. And I'm really proud that I was able to be part of that effort to get that completed. I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure I get through my slides, and then we'll come back. So let me just share screen again. Okay, great. So back to my office, we have, when I came into office, I worked with my staff and we came up with core values. We identified the 4 I's. It's not a coincidence, I wear glasses. These include integrity, independence, impact, and inclusion. This was really important to me to have shared values with my team so that we were all working collaboratively and cohesively together to achieve the results in our office. We also came up with community agreements. Now, I say all of this because these are some of the underlying things that an office does, and it's so important to do this work because it sets up the office well. Okay, how can audits be helpful? Well, here's a few reasons. They help in public trust in government operations. So when there's a program working well and an audit concludes that it's worked well, it really increases that public trust. And we did that with the library audit, looking at the library tax funds, which said that they spent their funds by the book. We like puns in our office, but that's something that, is really great about audits. We also conduct audits because you can then identify any problems and concerns early on. You can identify that waste or misuse or and correct for that. So that's a really great benefit of conducting audits early on. The former fire chief used to say, I love audits because when I'm able to ask for information that, he wasn't able to look at deeply, and we were able to go in and do a deep dive and look at the issues and then help him make those corrections. And that, of course, improves programs and services. And then finally, I think our audits are helpful because they can also communicate city issues that may be misunderstood. And I also feel free to sign up for our newsletter in our office. We send out something about once a month that gives you updates on audits or any really important city news. So how do we audit? So number one, I try to make sure that we ask the right audit questions. Those of you who are familiar with Bardak's Public Policy Eightfold Path, this is a professor at the Public Policy School at UC Berkeley, and this is studied in all the public policy schools. But the most important part of audits is defining the problem. You've got, probably you can come up with hundreds and thousands of questions on a general topic, whether it's homelessness or street paving, but the most important part is to identify what is the question that you're trying to answer. And we're very focused and making sure that we ask the question and we don't go beyond the question, because we don't have 5 years to study a topic. We try to get our audits out within about a year. We also consider the audience. I think I talked about this already. Who's the consumers of the audit? We then gather and analyze information. And we do that by asking, we put out a request for information for the department that we're auditing. We conduct interviews. We also may conduct surveys in the 911 community, the communications center audit, where we looked at dispatchers. We interviewed all of the dispatchers and got information and found that all of their morale was low. And so conducting information by talking and directly connecting with the people that are providing that service is really helpful. Let's see. We also conduct a lot of data analysis when there is data. And then we conduct quality control. Like I said, we trace the phrases and the numbers and charts back to its original source. And then at the end, we communicate findings and recommendations. And we do that through the audit, through social media, through a newsletter, and by talking to the press. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of examples of audits. And some of you may be familiar with some of this. I see Margot Schuler in the audience, and she can probably also give you more information about the street paving audit, which we conducted a couple years ago. So this is an audit which, as I said, we start with what is define the problem. So what are the objective questions we're trying to answer? And so on this audit, we asked two questions. One, are there sufficient resources to maintain Berkeley's streets? And then two, are there clear policies and procedures to guide the street paving decisions? What we found is that Berkeley has one of the worst paving conditions in the Bay Area. Berkeley streets will deteriorate at the current rate of funding, and that deferred maintenance was extremely high at $300 million, and Berkeley's infrastructure is very old and has been neglected for many years, and that deferred maintenance is only going to increase as we move on. We finally saw that also that the policy on street paving was outdated, and there was no definition of equity. So this is just a couple of graphics to show you how we communicate our audit results. So on the left, you see figure 4, which gives the pavement condition index. This is from the MTC report, and it shows you that Berkeley is at the low end next to Oakland, and it's at that level called at risk. So it's deteriorated even more since then. The next figure, and this figure I really love, it shows you the pavement life cycle, and it shows you that if you don't rehabilitate streets, if you don't maintain your streets, at a current level, then you're going to these streets are going to fail, and it actually costs a lot more to rehabilitate those failed streets. So it's actually very important to get them at that, that second tier level rather than having them get to a lower deterioration. The other thing we saw was we looked at the street paving condition index by district, and we segmented this by residential versus by all street types. And we saw that the streets in the hills of Berkeley had a higher pavement condition index than the lower parts of Berkeley. And this is where we made some recommendations on the equity policy, and brought in, I think Oakland had some of that information and the Public Works Commission worked on, a great new policy that was then passed, I believe. So next, I'm going to go over the another audit, and this is on the Berkeley Police Department overtime. And I'm going to only go over this one objective because it's a very long audit. So I'm going to just cover that, but I'm happy to answer questions too about the other parts of the audit. This was an audit we conducted. There were a lot of questions around the police department's budget. And what we did was look at the overtime part of the police department's budget. And we asked these 4 questions. 1, what policing functions does the Berkeley Police Department's use of overtime cover? The second question we asked was really looking at whether or not the department regularly assessed their staffing levels to meet community needs. We also asked the question of whether the department was managing any excessive uses of overtime. And finally, we asked this question around the outside entities work. So the police department engages in some work for outside entities. For example, they conduct overtime work for private security work for the Apple Store, for the Cal football games. And we asked a question of whether or not these agreements were in accordance with the law and transparent. And so in terms of findings, we found that the overtime use the overtime is used to maintain their regular staffing that's set by the department. We also saw that the staffing levels, so they have these minimum staffing levels in the department, and we saw that the staffing levels, they could cause unnecessary overtime if they're not regularly updated. And then finally, we found that some officers were working excessive overtime, and that increases health and safety risks for officers. And then finally, and I'll go over this in detail, we saw that this work for outside entities did not have contracts. There was no policies associated with these. So in looking at this outside contract work or outside entity work, since there were no contracts, we saw that in 2020, 50% of Berkeley Police Department officers conducted this type of overtime. So this was something that a lot of the department had exposure to. We also saw that this increased over between 2019 to 2020, as you can see in this graphic. The top outside entities included the Apple Store, 4th Street businesses, and UC Berkeley. We also saw that there were other departments in other areas that have this kind of arrangement, but they had policy, they had contracts in place. We also then looked in more detailed and looked at how the reimbursement structure worked. These were Berkeley police officers who would work overtime and be charged overtime and paid through the city. And then these entities would reimburse the city for this. And we saw that there were no vehicle costs that were charged to these outside entities, and no administrative costs. So we had somebody in the Berkeley Police Department administration that would administer this program, but they were not being reimbursed for their time in administering this program. We also saw that, you can see here a vehicle sitting outside of the Apple store, who would, often have the car on, and given the gas costs and the cost to our climate, I found that it was important to call out that there were no vehicle and maintenance and gas costs associated with this. We also saw that it was difficult to determine if the costs were fully recovered or we were getting too much money. There was no way, the county system, we couldn't separate out the revenue with the data that we the receipts and the data that we got. We couldn't reconcile it, and it was a manual process, so it was subject to errors, and that billing could have errors. We also saw that there were no, like I said, no written agreements, policies, or contracts with these entities. And, there was no policy or criteria that governed the approval and the administration of this work. And then we also saw that this can present risks in terms of liabilities, conflict of interest risk, an officer working, they are in uniform, but they are essentially working for this private entity. And so it was unclear, are they working for the city? Are they working for the entity? And who are they actually, who's liable if something were to happen to the officer or to a situation that involved the officer? So we pointed that out. We pointed out the risk of administrative gaps. Also that there were no limits, and that without policies and documentation, we can't ensure that these services are transparent or equitable. And you can see here on the map where the services were located. Many of them were in the 4th Street area, and there was no information on the website at the time with regards to these services and how somebody can obtain these types of services. I also wanted to just share that here are some other audit reports that my office has done. We've done work on COVID-19 budgeting and the impacts of COVID-19 on Berkeley budgeting. We've done work on fire inspections of buildings. We also looked at the state's domestic violence response policy and looked at Berkeley's policy and saw that there were areas that needed to be improved, library tax fund, police calls for service, and we also this year released a financial condition report, which looked at some of the short-term and long-term financial conditions and put it into plain language so that you don't have to be a financial expert to understand, some of the indicators of how well the city is doing financially. audits coming up. I'm currently working on a workforce retention audit. This is a really big audit, as many of you may know. This city and many other cities have experienced a retention issue. We obviously need the staffing in place, the people in place to get our work done and to be able to deliver the quality services for Berkeley residents. And in many areas, we saw that there are, high vacancy rates, and that, bringing people on, if that's taking a long time, that may have impacts on the ability to conduct the work for the city of Berkeley. So we really wanted to take a deep dive into understanding why people have left the city of Berkeley. So we conducted 2 surveys, one for the current city of Berkeley employees, and asked them, what works well in your job? Do you have the necessary tools and trainings in place to do your job? Have you looked for another job? What would entice you to stay? We also conducted a separate survey of individuals that have exited Berkeley to find out what made them leave and how could we have retained them. So this is important work that, touches upon the services of Berkeley. And so that's ongoing. We have not started the rent board audit, but this is an audit that we're going to be doing because this is an entity that has not been audited. And what we do when we conduct our assessment as to what to audit, we look at the risk level of the issue. We also look at whether or not that entity has been audited or not. So we're doing a rent board audit in the same way that we did the library tax fund, which had not been audited before. We are currently doing an audit of homelessness and mental health. As you all know, this is a big issue in our community, and we've been just starting up on this audit, looking at the access to mental health services for those who are unhoused. And so we're really excited to do that work and hope to bring forward some good recommendations to city government. And then we also conduct audit follow-up. And for those that are interested, we have a dashboard that you can go to. If you go to our website, you can you can access our audit follow-up dashboard, which includes a lot of really great information about which audits are, where we are on each of these audits. I think this is one of the most actually important things in an audit. You can conduct a really great audit, but if city government doesn't take action to implement your recommendations, then we're kind of back to square one. So I try to proactively work with city government in conducting what we call audit follow-up. So we work with departments and we ask every department to report out to city council a report on where they are at with the audit follow-up. So for example, the overtime audit that was reported to council, I believe last month, or perhaps the month before, and that has actually gone to the city policy committee on public safety, and they just discussed that audit this morning at their meeting. And I stated at that committee the importance of ensuring that all of the administrative costs, including the fuel costs, were included in the costs agreements with these outside entities. And then I just wanted to put a plug into to be determined. It means if you have audits that you think are important for me to consider doing, please send me an email I love hearing from folks directly about what issues they think should be audited. We take all of that information and then make a decision after we collect all of that information. I do put in an audit plan every year to City Council with the audits I'll be doing in the coming year. Okay, and then finally, I have a slide on engage with your government. So I think some of you may be familiar with this, but I know as somebody that, obviously I had federal government experience and I had experience in San Francisco and New York City. But this is specific for Berkeley, but it may also be relevant to Emeryville and Albany. But here's some different ways that you can get involved in city government if you're not familiar with this already. At the city council level, you can attend a meeting and provide public comment. This is a really great way to really make your voice heard and to be part of democracy in action. I've seen council members really respond well to public comment. So we live in a community with very engaged residents, and I love the public comment part of meetings. So come to a meeting, provide public comment, meet with your council member. If you have an issue that you think that your council member can help you resolve, or that can, provide and propose legislation on, or work on, meet with them and ask them about it. Also, track the issue and attend one of the policy committees. So the policy committees, for those who are not familiar, city council used to just be a city council meeting. They created these policy committees. There's a variety of committees, from public safety to the let's see, the budget and finance committee, policy committee, and they meet to take a certain council item and have a deeper discussion and dive into it further and work on it. And so go to one of those meetings if your topic is on one of those meetings, and really engage in that discussion with that council member or council members. I think there's usually 3 per meeting. So, keep track of those meetings. These meetings, I think, all need to have agendas and agendized prior to the meeting. So you can, look ahead of time on the website to see what's on the meetings and keep track of that. City commissions. So I actually was part of the Labor Commission, and many years ago, there used to be a Budget Commission. And this is a really great way to get involved in an issue on a commission that, and you're working with a group of people who these are all appointed by city council members. So, get involved with a commission. They're great. Here's a link to the commissions. They're over 30 in Berkeley. And it's a great way to meet people, and commissions can devise their own item and they can send them to city council. So this is a really great way of getting involved. But really, identify what issue are you passionate about. And depending on the issue, you can get involved in the commission or attend the city council meeting, or get involved with a group that's already working on that issue. I want to put in a plug-in for, community organizing, organize your neighbors around an issue that you feel passionate about, that you think they may feel passionate about. And bring them to a city council meeting. There's strength in numbers, having one person make public comment versus 5 or 10, that's a big difference. Also read and do your research. The city of Berkeley has records online where you can search for prior council items. So you can look at and do some of the research there. And then finally, follow the money. If you're working on an issue, find out how much is being spent in that particular bucket. Look at the budget books in Berkeley. And if you ever have questions on this, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help guide you through Berkeley budgeting. Finally, for those of you who want to be involved, I really think this is a great way to get involved because it's how I got involved. Run for office. And if you ever want to have, conversations about how that happens, get in touch with me. I love getting more people involved in running for office because it's a direct way for you to have that very direct impact. And then this is my contact info and my phone number. And so feel free to get in touch with me. And I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are questions. Okay. Okay, so Adina has a question. What happened in response to this audit? How did the police department respond? So the police department agreed to our recommendations. Yeah, it's wonderful that they've made progress on some of these recommendations. One of the things that we wanted them to do was have increased transparency on how they conduct their staffing, so their minimum staffing numbers, and they've actually put that information out on their website. I believe they have a new data portal, and that they include a lot of information in that data portal, from their staffing numbers to another audit we did was looking at the calls for service numbers and the types of calls for service the police department gets and their responses to that. And that audit, we also recommended they put that information on the data portal, and they do include that, and it's actually interactive. So feel free to go to that website for more information. But the audit was, they did agree to the audit, and they're, I think, finalizing some of the work on these outside entities. But the overall audit, I was really concerned seeing that many officers were working, they were working, I think it was over 80 hours a week. And that was really concerning to me, that in the same way that the dispatchers some were working 16-hour days, these are individuals responding to public safety in our communities. And I don't know about you, but I do not want, someone responding who's been working 80 hours a week. I want public safety officials and our dispatchers to be well rested. So we made some recommendations around that, and they agreed to them. Okay. Next question. I'd like to ask a question about privatization of city services. So this is Henry.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a little background. I'm on the healthcare team, and we've become increasingly concerned about privatization of healthcare services at the national level and at the state level in a number of states around the country. So my question is whether, from your perspective, there are concerns about this in the city of Berkeley. And we all know that creeping privatization has made inroads into education, into prisons, into public safety, and a whole range of services that would be considered public goods. And the League of Women Voters actually has a very succinct national position expressing concerns about privatization and the limits that should be put on it. So do you have any comments about how that might apply to the city?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The city of Berkeley has their own health department, for those of you that are not familiar with that. Instead of the most public health services are delivered by counties. But Berkeley has their own health department, and we saw this throughout the pandemic. We were able to make our own decisions based on the health officer's directives, and then in terms of other health services like mental health services, we deliver those services in-house. So the city of Berkeley conducts that. In terms of privatization, I know that other city governments have gone to, I'm not sure if it's in public, in the healthcare field, but I know that other cities have gone to models of public private partnerships. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but I don't think that that's it's about privatization in general, but not about healthcare. Yeah. Berkeley delivers a lot of their services in-house. And we obviously do some contract work. So there's some consulting work and private contracting work. That's something that I think will continue, but there is a strong, most of the work is being done in-house. And, obviously during emergency times when we're not able to deliver some of that work, that does get housed outside. But, most of it is done in-house. Would your audits be able to detect corruption? Linda, did you want to explain your question a little bit more, or is beyond that?
No, it's just a possibility. And I wondered if you were equipped to find something like that. And in your other work, have you found pockets of corruption in the work you've done?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Audits are supposed to find corruption in that particular area. We have a fraud, waste, and misuse identifier in all of our audits. We go through that list and look to ensure that there isn't any, there's not something funny going on. So for example, when we conducted our fleet audit to look at, whether the fleet fund was adequately funded, we went through and ensured that all of the fleet was there and not missing, that there wasn't, a stolen vehicle somewhere. So we definitely do take precautions to look at issues like that. Whenever there's my office is also supposed to be informed when there is any kind of embezzlement or any kind of cash, missing cash. And there was an audit done before me in which that had taken place, that I believe over $50,000 was stolen by an employee. And then what was put in place was stronger mechanisms to ensure that there was training on like how to handle cash, and having, you know, a separation of duties in somebody that takes in cash versus somebody that deposits cash. You know, these are good financial measures. So I haven't personally encountered anything in that respect. But in every single audit that we do as part of the standards, we go through and make sure that there isn't any kind of fraud taking place. Okay, and this is a question from Adina. How do you handle working with departments that are wary of your work or slow about sharing information with your team? Good question. While I'd like to think everyone would, you know, love working with me and my team, we're generally pretty nice. You know, not everyone's going to love an auditor. So it's, you know, it can be challenging sometimes, especially when it's a department with staff that's not familiar with our work and what we do. I've had to talk to staff members and you know, print out the charter section that says we're allowed to gather all the information. This is our authority. I've had to have that conversation sometimes several times to ensure that they understand our authority and our role. And this is where I feel very lucky that that kind of authority is in place in the charter and in the Berkeley Municipal Code. I have, you know, had, you know, I've had some challenges getting information, and what, you know, my approach is always to try to just go directly to the person, ask them, you know, what's the holdup? You know, we're allowed to get this information. I try to do it really respectfully, but at the end of the day, if I don't get the information I need, I do escalate that information. So I've had to go to city council and publicly report out that we didn't get certain pieces of information. And as a result, a few days later, we got that information that we had asked for quite a long period of time. So sometimes we have to escalate that, but I try to, work collaboratively when I can. And where does the auditor fit in the city's organizational chart? Yes, so the auditor reports to the people of Berkeley. So if you're a resident of Berkeley, you are my boss. I report to you. That's where the organization fits in. I don't report to city council. I don't report to the city manager. One of the really great benefits of having an independent auditor is that I can, I can be truly independent. I can listen to my constituents, and if there's a department head or if there's a city council member saying, please don't do this audit or please don't do that, I don't need to listen to that. I am truly independent. I'm going to listen to the people that live in Berkeley, Adina, Margot, like those of you who are my bosses here. Ruby.
Thanks, Jenny. I was wondering whether there might be a difference in rate that the police department would charge nonprofits or government services as opposed to for-profit. So, since you mentioned the work at Apple, or I know that everybody has heard about San Francisco, where there is a lot of demand for police services by these stores. Is that, what is the normal procedure
Yeah, so in looking at how they were charging, they actually were trying to charge according to the officer salary. So they were looking at, they didn't include the administrative costs and the fuel and vehicle costs, but they did look at that particular officer that worked, those specific hours and what their overtime rate was. So they did use that information to calculate the overtime cost. So it wasn't based on the entity itself, it was based on the personnel. So that I thought that was a really accurate way of assessing the officer costs.
Well,
Okay,
it just
everyone,
seemed to me that a case could be made for charging a for-profit entity more for services than a government or nonprofit entity. But I know it's, not a subject
question.
maybe that you would be wanting to answer in a public forum, but, I'm just raising it because there is so much concern now, particularly in view of the tremendous increase in profits over the last several years of various very large mega businesses and the loss of revenue by very poor people. So, this question, which has never really been satisfactorily addressed about
Mhm.
income inequality is part of that
well,
question.
I think actually,
Thanks.
everyone, it's 8:02. And our evening program was 7 to 8 this evening. So I know that Auditor Wong is actually in Sacramento. We appreciate her for being so generous with her time this evening. And I want to thank everyone for coming to this year's fall meeting. So let's have a round of applause for Auditor Wong. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you at the next league events. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.